Microphone's on?
Yep.
Okay. Ready? Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for November 24th, 2014. We'll begin with the special order calendar. Decision items. Item number 1, 32706BZ, 133 East 58th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, just in terms of submissions, they submitted the sprinkler information, revised the plans with the required notes, and revised the statement of facts, all as requested, so I didn't have any other comments on this. Anyone else?
Continued hearing items. Item number 2, 24532BZ, 12305 101st Avenue, Queens.
Okay, in terms of this one also, just kind of some questions. There's a white truck that's been parked on the site. Could we find out what's the story with that white truck? Because there's no parking allowed on that site. And the applicant needs to provide an updated affidavit of ownership because the ownership has changed. And I didn't have any other comments. Anyone else?
No. Nope. Item number 3, 92157BZ, 6602 New York Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay. In this one, the submission provided the hours of operation and a site plan as requested. They showed striping on the plan, and they addressed the question of the urban context for this use as being appropriate within the neighborhood character, all as requested. Some open questions. They were going to find out about the unpainted portion of the wall adjacent, and the comment was, well, we don't own the wall, but actually that wasn't the question. The question is, please approach the owner and offer to paint, since that's this thing about shared walls where it's nobody's problem, and in fact it's more likely that the owner of this property paints that side wall than the owner of the adjoining property, so please approach the owner about that. There was only, on the plans only showed 2 bushes along the perimeter, and the instructions, both in the original grant and in our last hearing, was that there would be continuous planting along the perimeter, so the plans have to be revised, and that planting actually has to be done. The applicant was also asked to provide information on how cars will be managed on the site. It seems that there's only 2 or 3, hard to tell, parking spaces on the site plan. The reason it's hard to tell is it's not indicated whether those are there's 3 parking spaces or 2. And then there was, in fact, an invisible drawing submitted. No invisible drawings. All drawings have to be submitted and be legible. Please, applicants, check the drawings before you give them to us. Okay, that's all I had. Anyone else?
Okay. Item number 4, 36203BZ, 428 West 45th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, this one, the applicant submitted plans to show the striping, and the statement of fact states that striping will be done, please. They revised the statement of facts with respect to the storage and described it as being used for film industry related storage. They also provided photos to show that that strange place where there's planting in bondage is there actually for a reason, because there are clear story cellar windows that cannot be blocked by planting, and the fencing turns and has this roof because you've got windowsills. So that explained a lot. They also represented that they would keep that area clean, though I'm not exactly sure how they're going to do that. And also they explained that that 24-foot curb cut, which was wider than the original approval, was actually installed by the city when they redid the sidewalks and improves the access to the parking. And generally, this is a very clean site, so I didn't have any issues with this. Anyone else?
I had just asked at the previous hearing to show us there's supposed to be a sign that says for private use only, and I don't think it's up. It's stated on the certificate of occupancy, so perhaps they just need to put that sign back up on the fence.
Okay.
Item number 5, 7612BZ, 148 Norfolk Street, Brooklyn.
Okay. Sorry, this one, there was a request to adjourn. No, sorry.
Previous.
That was previous. Sorry, I'm a little, okay, 916, sorry. They did provide a table comparing the floor area with that's in the cellar, that would have been the original cellar, with the floor area in the attic. And they provided a map showing other sites that have more than one FAR in the area. And they provided a drawing that shows adjacent buildings, sort of their version of a limited streetscape drawing, which is not exactly what we asked for. So in terms of things that are still outstanding, drawings were very, very difficult to read, so you have to submit legible drawings, visible legible drawings, and we'd ask that they provide a photo montage streetscape to show neighborhood context, that is, photographs of every building on the block, on both sides of the block, so that we can see, and ideally actually show the building that's proposed in the context on the block so that we can see its height relative to its neighbors. There was a submission of a table, as I explained, a table comparing floor area, a table showing other sites in the neighborhood, but nothing was tied together. And so what I'm noticing is happening is the applicants are submitting materials, and they just sort of submit it in a stack and then say, we submitted the materials, but they never make an argument. They don't tie it together. So they expect us actually to go through the map and try to find the site and try to find which buildings in the map are the ones that, on the map, are the ones that have greater than one FAR. That's the work of the applicant. You have to make the argument yourself. We're not going to do that work for you. It's not, for one, you're supposed to be making an argument in favor of your client's application. And the statement of facts is there for a purpose, not just to make a simple statement that the building complies with neighborhood character, but to say, here are the exhibits. The exhibits show the following information. The following information supports my contention that the building fits within neighborhood character or the other kinds of findings. With respect to this specific application, this is effectively a 4-story house, and a site visit, a recent site visit, shows that there are no 4-story houses in the neighborhood. It shows that 3-story is the maximum, and that includes a FEMA lift. 2 houses that were lifted to comply with FEMA regulations go to 3 stories. So how do you make an argument that a 4-story house is compatible with the neighborhood context? There's a house that's shown adjacent to this house at 144 Norfolk, and it's shown as being the same height as this proposed house, but in reality, that's not the case at all. That house is actually has an attic level that's pushed very, very far back onto the house, so it sort of stacks up as little boxes. And what's being proposed here is raising the entire house at the front. So that's not an equivalent. That's why elevations don't tell the story. That's why you need photographs. In addition, the applicant was asked to provide an axonometric of the project. The axonometric should actually represent the project. This one does not. The roof line is completely unrelated to the roof line of the shown on the drawings, on the other drawings. Then there's a kind of a big issue. The issue of this building is being lifted up, and whether this is a full demolition of the existing walls. So the question is, will the house be lifted or will it be demolished and rebuilt? The first floor drawing shows no existing walls to remain at all new construction. So as far as I can tell from the drawings, this house is being effectively demolished and not rebuilt. If it's being demolished, then we have an issue about this special permit because it only applies to enlargements. If that is the case, if demolition is the case, then the applicant really needs to look to case law and BSA precedent and the zoning resolution for a possible argument that this special permit can apply in a case where a building is actually being demolished and then lifted to fulfill government requirements. Those were my comments. Anybody else?
Regarding the area study, I was struck by the table that showed where a special permit is involved and where it was compared to the Pluto data. And in all cases, you know, the FARs were 1 or below for the special permits, and the Pluto data shows homes with FARs of 1.35, 1.34, which in my opinion brings into question the accuracy of the Pluto data. Pluto website does list the FARs as estimates, or the floor area as an estimate. So I just question a lot of the Pluto data because all of them were way off. And then in addition, they have a number of homes that were constructed recently, and the neighborhood FAR permitted is a maximum of 0.6. And these buildings, some of them, I think there were 5, and 2 of them didn't have COs, but 3 of them did, and they're saying they're legal, but they don't comply with the neighborhood FAR, and I don't see how that's possible.
Right. On a recent site visit, we actually walked down Norfolk Street, and it's apparently quite well known that 2 of the houses are very overbuilt and illegal, so they should never be used. And actually, one of them was used in this study. They really should never be used as neighborhood character. And that is a very big problem. Actually, the whole subject of Pluto data and floor area, in my former job, I did quite a lot of that, where I would pull Department of Buildings records and then compare it against data, and they bore 0 relationship. Sometimes the data underestimated, the Pluto data underestimated the floor area, but most of the time it overestimated. So it includes cellars, for example, because it's just sort of culling from what's on the DOB site, and the site includes gross often. So that's the, okay.
Appeals calendar, decision items. Item number 6, 16214A, 100 Gregorich Avenue, Staten Island.
Okay. I just note that the applicant revised the site plan, but did not submit a revised statement of facts. Perhaps that wasn't clear that they needed to do that in future. Statement of facts need to be revised to reflect new data, so everything's clean and closed up. But other than that, I didn't have comment. Anyone else?
Continued hearing items. Item number 7 and item number 6, 7 and 8, sorry. 16612A and 10713A, 638 East 11th Street, Manhattan. We have adjournment requests.
Yeah, which we can set tomorrow, the date.
Okay. Item number 9, 24512A, 515 East 5th Street, Manhattan.
Okay. So in terms of the submissions, the applicant provided copies of terminations on the leases for the duplex units that were submitted to the tenants, indicating that the termination is effective in 90 days, but 1/31/15. The demolition plans were provided but were not marked approved by the Department of Buildings. The statement of facts indicates that apartments 6A and D are vacant and 6B will be vacated this month, but didn't mention anything about 6C, so that's actually a question. What about 6C? DOB also disapproved of the application to remove the penthouse floor only. And as discussed at the hearing, and we'll discuss more in the hearing, the application really is to DOB is to submit application to remove both the 6th floor and the penthouse. And once construction is underway adequately to establish that the penthouse is being removed, then we can move to approve the 6th floor to remain, and then the applicant can file a post-amendment approval. And Department of Buildings is completely aware of this plan, so this should not be something that the applicant needs to do much negotiating on with DOB. The applicant states it is fearful to submit drawings to remove both the penthouse and the 6th floor because of effective notice to neighbors and electeds that both will be removed when they will not. I think that's actually sort of a community outreach responsibility on the part of the owner. And in terms of this general comments about some of the statements, that statement, for example, the applicant stated that it would be a fraud on the Department of Buildings to be filing drawings that are not what you actually intend to do. But actually, I don't know what percent, but it could be nigh on 90% of drawings that are filed at the Buildings Department are filed and with the idea that they will be updated as more information comes in, and often they're changed dramatically at post-amendment approvals. Sometimes floors are added, floors are subtracted. It's just how it's done, so it's certainly not a fraud. And in terms of getting to the bottom of this, because we do want to see this penthouse floor removed prior to grant, the applicant should bring in the contractor and architect to tomorrow's hearing, and we can discuss how to go about the technical removal in terms of Department of Buildings approval and how you close up the roof, et cetera, which the applicant claimed was somehow or other an impossibility. Any other? Also there were two other comments. The applicant was asked to discuss the fire in 2005, which he did not, and also was asked to provide sprinkler drawings, which they did not, so please do that.
And
Other
also, the hardwired smoke detectors.
To show on the plans that they're
Yes.
hardwired.
Right.
They've also given us sprinkler inspections from March to August, but I don't think that they've supplied any information about what happened between August and now. And I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with you that there is really no reason why they cannot file for the demolition of both the penthouse and the sixth floor if that's required. I think DOB is totally amenable to understanding that things change. And I liken it to when applicants actually file an as-of-right drawing with the Department of Buildings while they're here at BSA pending some other approval, and then they'll go back and they will file a PAA. Well, this is just sort of the reverse. They're going to take something down, and there's no fraud that's been perpetrated on a city government. So I add that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay.
Item number 9, 1114A through 1414A, 198th Street, Queens.
Okay, the applicant submitted a revised statement of facts, which makes the argument that no general city law 36 waiver is required because there's sprinklering, but does not state whether there's 8% frontage on 47th Street for the entirety of the complex. So we actually don't have anything to start the conversation on. I'd say the biggest difference here is, of course, these are individual houses, not a single building, and that 8% frontage would work if this was a single multiple dwelling, but it isn't with a single frontage, a main entrance. The applicant was asked to go back to the financials and isolate value of vacant land from improvements. I don't believe that was done. Commissioner Otley Brown will continue that part of the conversation. They were also asked to amend the statement of findings to address the question of serious loss. I didn't see much of that. And also was specifically asked to discuss the structural integrity of the building since it's been abandoned for 10 years. They did not mention that at all. It's a very important question. Whether elements need to be removed now and so on. The drawing that was submitted that was supposed to be explaining what the as-of-right conditions are was extremely confusing. I read the notes, I tried to understand what was existing and what was proposed and what was as-of-right, and I absolutely could not figure it out. The applicant needs to provide a drawing that clearly shows what can be built if it were required to conform to current zoning. That's the as-of-right drawing, not kind of like a modified proposed drawing with notes on it. The dimensions on the site plan are also extremely confusing. There are dimensions that sort of fly and connect to nothing. Therefore, it's unclear to what they refer, and especially where the area of the map street begins. So, and so based on that, it seems as if the front yards of the project are sitting within the bed of the map street, which requires another GCL waiver. A survey, which was not provided, needs to be provided, and the proposed project overlaid on top of that survey, so we can really understand where's the map street, where's the project. The applicant was also asked to provide drawings showing the original vested work as opposed to the work that will be performed to satisfy DOB review, and it did not do that. I note that the the fire department has requested that the building be fully sprinklered, buildings. So we were asked the applicant to explain why a GCL 36 waiver is not required. It goes kind of on with case law and so on, but effectively admits that a GCL 36 waiver is required since 198th Street is not improved, and that if never improved, access to the houses would be on the property itself. So that's proof that this waiver is needed. Question though, why isn't 198th Street being built out? I understood that actually that's part of the responsibility of the owner, that they build out half the street as part of a pavement plan, a builder's pavement plan. So I'm not understanding why this isn't being handled by the owner, because otherwise the buildings really are landlocked. The applicant cited to a case I know really intimately, calendar number 81-06, about some houses on 83rd Street. That was cited as an example of a building frontage waiver because that house did not have the 8% frontage, let's say 8% of its entire perimeter fronting on 83rd Street. But it's really an inapposite comparison because the three houses that were in the discussion, all of them are individual houses fronting on 83rd Street. And the only issue really had to do with an extension at the rear of this building, and so really irrelevant in this case. The applicant also argues that BSA calendar number 231-97A is a similar project which was part of a larger development, and that was approved with only a GCL 35 waiver, which I believe this project probably needs too. But the materials provided don't speak to why this was approved in this way. And so if the applicant wants to make an argument about this, there's going to need to be more information and a Department of Buildings sign-off on that specific issue. Let's see, in this one. Okay, those were my comments.
Well, I think you covered most of my comments. Just to get back to the 8% frontage, the applicant makes an argument that this is akin to one building. Well, yes and no. If he's going to make the argument that he's got 8% if it's one building, then he's got to show the criteria for it being one building. Otherwise, it's going to be considered separate buildings. So if that's the argument that he's making, that he doesn't, that he meets the criteria of 8% because this is one building, then he needs to go back and show the building department criteria that meets one building.
Any other comment?
Oh, I was going to go into more
yes,
detail
please. Yeah,
about, well, we had asked for them to try and quantify the serious loss. They did state that the previous owner had all of their documents that had to do with financials, and the new owner does not have it. However, the new owner has information as to the purchase price, and they need to somehow isolate what part of that purchase price stands for the amount of work that's been done on this site pursuant to the old zoning. They have to figure out a way to do it. I gave a suggestion of somehow, using the purchase price and subtracting out some information. They did not take us up on that. We have a diagram that I think not only served to give information or provide some sort of an explanation as to the GCL waiver that isn't required, as well as the serious loss because these homes would have to be reoriented in a different direction. But there's no narrative that accompanies it, and there's no statement as to what kind of money would be lost, what part of the investment. So they really need to go back and revisit this issue and really address it in depth.
Thank you. Okay.
It's 10:29. Do you want to go to MUC now?
Oh, is it, what time is it? No, not 9. At 10:30, yeah. So let's jump now to that.
Okay, we're gonna jump to one of the zoning cases because Commissioner has to leave. New cases, item number 1, 12514BZ, 11 Avenue C, Manhattan.
Okay, this is an application for a variance on, basically right near Houston Street and Avenue C. And it's an extremely burdened lot, a very odd shape, basically a trapezoid, burdened with environmental remediation because there was a spill, a documented spill on the site from a gas station, and also difficult structural situations. So my first response is it certainly meets all of the unique physical condition questions that certainly do pose hardship, and that the proposal is actually quite minimal in the sense that it's only asking for waivers of lot coverage and will otherwise comply with height and setback, and the building is actually going to be shorter than what's permitted in the neighborhood. And then the only other request is a use group 6 at the ground floor, which is fairly standard in the neighborhood. So I'd say that the only thing really, I thought the argument was very well done. The text was well written, it tied well to the materials, and so I didn't have to do a lot of work to understand exactly what the applicant was arguing. The only thing actually missing from this application is neighborhood character study. You really do need to establish that the proposal, the height of the building, the commercial use, et cetera, the amount of floor area, and so on, is consistent with neighborhood character. That shouldn't be very difficult to do, but it does need to be included. And I think that was all my comments, so maybe we'll jump to Commissioner Otley.
Well,
Well, I had some questions
Oh,
about
yeah.
the A finding.
Okay.
As far as the environmental remediation, there's a consent order with ExxonMobil. So I didn't understand why the $900,000 remediation cost was included in the discussion of the hardship, because ExxonMobil is still responsible. And as far as the soil conditions, I don't think they've really shown that it's really completely unique to this area. I think we need some more information regarding other buildings that have been built in the area, and that they don't suffer from the same soft soil conditions. So it seems difficult for me to understand how geologically only this one particular site could have these soil conditions.
Okay. But even though they did describe some other sites where they were able to get the data
I didn't see
specifically
that actually submitted.
Oh, they just
I didn't
described it
see
in the
any
statement.
borings submitted or any information regarding, well, this is the types of foundations they had. It was just anecdotal. They didn't think that these buildings had to do this, but,
Okay.
I didn't see any borings. I would like to see other borings, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe they could provide us with a sort of a site map of the area.
Yes.
Showing the different types of soil mixtures that are in the area. That might be helpful for this discussion.
Okay, sorry. Commissioner Otley Brown?
Okay, so for the financial questions, I had a question concerning the site value and the way in which the inclusionary housing credits was calculated. They did give us a letter saying that they would be contributing $2 million. However, we generally don't use those kinds of letters and documentation that actually refers to the subject property. We like to see what's going on in terms of comparables to see if that validates that information. Their inclusionary housing credits, he used a ratio that was development rights to actual vacant land, and he came up with a 72% ratio that he then applied to the vacant land sales to get a price per developable square foot, which is the basis for the inclusionary housing credits. And the problem with that is that his development right comparables are based on 2013. However, his vacant land comparables are based on 2011, back when land was much cheaper. And he actually even shows that in his site value calculations for the vacant land. However, in this area, he doesn't do any trending for the vacant land for the ratio at all to bring it up to 2013 prices. So the result of that is that the development rights, the air rights, land comparables actually look more valuable against the vacant land, which gives you a higher ratio. So he needs to go back, redo that, and trend up those vacant land sales to 2013 so you can get a better idea of how the development rights actually relate to the vacant land. Get a new ratio and then apply that to the vacant land comparables. In terms of the retail rents, I think he needs to give us better comparables. This is prime retail space in that it actually has 3 frontages. It's very large and it has access to an awful lot of storage space in the basement. And the comparables that he showed us are older spaces that aren't very well laid out, at least don't appear to be, and so of course they would get lower rent. So he needs to find better comparables. And in terms of the cap rate, he has a cap rate of 5.5 across the board in all scenarios, and it's based on his realty rates cap rates, which show that residential is somewhere around 5.5, but retail is 4.71. So at least for the mixed use proposal, he needs to blend that cap rate with the retail cap rate and show us the documentation or the calculation that goes into what that cap rate would be. It should be less than the 5.5 that's actually used for the single-use scenarios. And those are my
Great,
comments.
thank you. Thank you. Okay, then we can go back to where we were.
Okay, back on appeals calendar. Continued hearing items, item number 11, 163 to 165 14A, 502, 504, 506 Canal Street, Manhattan.
Okay, this is sort of a bear of an application because it's really a quandary. The submission in response to our questions, the applicant provided sections showing how raising of the ground floor to meet the floodplain requirements would affect existing floor heights and sill heights. It shows that some sills will have to be raised, and that in case of 502 Canal, one roof would have to be raised. It shows a potential issue with the rear yard extension where the roof would have to be raised there, and claims that it would cause an increase in the degree of noncompliance. I note that, first of all, the degree of noncompliance with respect to the rear yard extensions is confusing as a statement because all 3 of these buildings are within 100 feet of a corner. I mean, basically the entire block is within 100 feet of a corner. So there are no rear yard regulations, so there is no noncompliance to increase. Also, the certificates of appropriateness that were provided shows that for 502, the entire building is basically being rebuilt because there was some kind of a notice from the Department of Buildings indicating that it was not safe. And so as a result, there was a requirement to rebuild structure, rebuild the front facade, which the certificate of appropriateness acknowledges or actually approves. So in that case, the one building that seems to need a roof being raised is the one that needs the most structure. So my comments really are that there were also submissions about how the protection plan for installing the floodgates would be handled. And now apparently it's sort of different floodgates than the ones that were shown to us at the first hearing. The proposal is to keep them at the building across the street. You need 4 guys. It's complex because if you've never installed one of these before, they're very heavy. You need 4 guys to carry it. I mean, and so we're talking about incredible preparedness in the advance of a storm when things are hysterical, and we're talking about tenants. And that's, for me, the biggest problem here. These are tenants who will be renting these places and really will have no real cognizance of the risk that all of their possessions are going to be exposed to because the landlord managed to get some kind of a special waiver like this. I might feel differently if this was a single-family home and the homeowner is apprised of, is totally aware that all their stuff is at risk, and so, announcements that there's a rain, they could move all their Persian carpets upstairs, or I don't know what, but tenants are come and go. And so I feel very, very uncomfortable about this. And because we're not talking about raising the building very much, we're talking about 23 inches. We're not talking about 6 feet. So for one, I don't see that, that there's actually that big of an issue to raise the floor. And in terms of landmarks, for one, there's a lot of different ways to approach it. To the extent that the doors, the threshold at the door is lower than the floodplain, that could actually either be handled by actually one of those floodgates that just drops right into the door frame. Those are quite standard. The other sills could either be lifted if they're below the level of the floor, or you can actually build the floor, which is done all the time in landmarks buildings, so that there's kind of like a little bench that's right in front of the window, so you don't actually have to do anything with the facade. And in terms of the rear extension, all of that roof can be lifted easily enough, and it's totally permitted in terms of zoning. So I'm not seeing that the hardship is extreme enough, given the risks to the tenants. And at this point, I'm just not convinced that this is an approvable application. Other comments?
I tend to agree. At the last hearing, I had requested that they come back with something that reflected a passive way of being able to deal with water incursion. And I did not see anything of that nature. I fully agree that the sill issue is a design issue, and I'm sure that landmarks would be understanding of having to either change the facade in some way. Of course, it would, it has to be something that is reasonable, but under these conditions, I don't see that they would have that big a problem. I had asked that they talk about the crawl space and what happens if water, which I'm sure it would start to accumulate in the crawl space. Those gates will not stop water necessarily from getting into the crawl space, and that to me raises the question of water then bubbling up. It has nowhere to go. You've now not given it any place to kind of escape to because you've got the floodgates up, so you might be creating a bigger hazard. I also asked the question, as if they are putting up these gates, water then starts rushing down the street. Well, fine, it's protecting your building, but that you've created a dam. So what happens to that water? Have you created something now that the neighbors are now having a larger problem because there's more water pressure on the adjacent buildings? So I have concerns about the emergency plan being totally dependent on people. People fail all the time. Not that you want them to, but they do. And there's got to be a way that that building on its own in some way can mitigate water damage without having to rely on people to protect it.
They're asking us to approve a dry flood proofing scheme. It wasn't clear to me whether Agrifence has either been approved by FEMA or the Buildings Department for dry flood proofing. So that's one thing I'd like to know. The other thing is their scenario, their layout has to be designed by a design professional, and it has, the plans have to be sealed and stamped. I was concerned that they apparently didn't intend to anchor them to the sidewalk or to the building, which didn't make a lot of sense to me, considering that debris could be running down the street and hit the fencing and either move it, and then anchoring it would actually improve the seal. So I think they need to have some calculations in terms of, you know, the proposed height of water and a certain amount of debris coming down and how they're going to actually anchor these. In the letter they sent us, they said something about how after we install these, if we think we have to anchor them to the building, we'll go to landmarks. It sounds like, well, if it's in a situation where you're flooding, it's a little late. So, in addition, Appendix G requires a designated professional be responsible for monitoring and inspection of these, the dry flood proofing in its storage location during the erection. When it's completely installed, somebody has to sign off on these. And then after the event, someone has to inspect them while they're being put back into storage. So who is that design professional? Who is going to be doing this work?
Okay. I'm guessing that there is nobody who would volunteer for such a job. Okay, I think that's it.
New cases, item number 12, 66539A and 10714A, 5557 West 44th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, this is an application for a multiple dwelling law waiver to allow existing, so let's say, to allow an enlargement of an existing building, a hotel, and to kind of maintain non-complying courts that extend from that. Do we couple this with the amendment? The other one, with the amendment, okay. In addition, there was, actually, it really dates back in 1939. There was a BSA approval of a substandard staircase to permit egress for the club, which it used to be a private club that had sleeping accommodations, and it was to allow that to be used for office use on floors 4 to 9. The deficiency back then was that the staircase was 2 inches narrower than required. Somehow or other, though, more recently, the building was converted to a hotel, and it doesn't. I'm not really sure exactly what happened to that staircase with the conversion from one use to the other. Either DOB wasn't aware or it wasn't discussed specifically. I'm curious about that. I'm also curious about how it was converted into a hotel, given that the courts were substandard. We just had an application a couple of weeks ago where the applicant had to come for a waiver on the intercourt regulations to convert to a hotel. So I'm just curious how that happened. And so I guess the big question for me is, there's 2 big questions. One is whether that existing staircase, which will now receive people coming from 9 floors above, is viewed by fire department, Department of Buildings, the code generally, as adequate to handle the occupancy load. So there were, as far as I could tell, there were no occupancy calculations provided in this application. So where does everyone go, or any kind of egress route plan? So you can't tell where everyone on those floors goes, which staircase, how many are permitted by each staircase. I see that there's a scissor stair installed in the new portion of the building, but eventually it links up to the existing stairs, and what does that do in terms of egress, emergency, and all that? With respect to the court, There's the drawings show, and the drawings are actually quite clear in plan anyway, but Commissioner Hinkson will speak to other issues. The drawings show that there are two smaller courts proposed in the addition, which will take advantage of the larger courts at the adjoining hotels. The big issue for me is that the existing courts in the existing hotel are very small, and when you add 9 stories to it, you create this tunnel. And effectively, even though there are only 16 rooms that are relying on the light and presumably the air, but I understand there's going to be mechanical ventilation, so really it's the light. The fact is that with sort of a tunnel placed on top of this existing court, I can't really even imagine that any light gets down there. And I shouldn't actually be in the imagination department. The applicant really does need to show by section, by light studies, like what does penetrate down there with the proposed court. But I also look at it as, if you look at the plan of the proposed addition, there are 4 rooms at the back, and they're configured around sort of an octagonal extension at the rear. And it seems as if you were to pull back all the way to the 20-foot rear yard, you would get good-sized hotel rooms, and you would also be able to enlarge the court. So I'm not really understanding why the court is small, and I also don't understand why Court A is so much smaller than Court B if basically the plan is identical on 2 sides. Yes, also there was a pre-consideration issued by Commissioner Livian in 1999 with respect to the 36-inch wide stair. The pre-con makes some sort of reference to okay to approve in 99 the 34-foot wide stair as long as there's a 36-foot wide stair somewhere. And I didn't understand what that was. The applicant relies on that quite a lot, and they don't understand what it was being proposed and what's actually was done or will be done. And I think that's basically my question.
I agree with you on all of your issues. I specifically wanted to have more information on how the new addition acts with the existing rooms that rely on that inner court. It's not clear to me whether or not enough light actually does penetrate that court, so I think that they need to beef up that argument. They also make an argument concerning the size of the rooms, that they need to be of a certain size so that they're handicapped accessible, and I think considering they have an existing structure, presumably with handicapped rooms, it begs the question, can they rely on the existing rooms that they have that are handicapped accessible? Do they need to have handicapped accessible rooms in the new addition? So they need to talk about local law 58, talk about ADA requirements, because that would presumably, maybe they can increase the amount of rooms in a sort of in a smaller space without having to have larger rooms. Also, they talk about that they're, as of right, is really complies with the rear court, with the courtyard, with the complying courtyard. But they don't give us anything sort of in between, and I think that goes to your question about sort of that octagonal section in the back, that if indeed they sort of had to regular sized or regular configured rooms, is that sort of an in-between and giving you a little bit more courtrooms, court space. Let's see, oh yeah, and they show the sky lobby, and I'm wondering if they need to garner more rooms, why do they have this sky lobby? I mean, it must be a nice amenity, but if they're looking for additional rooms in, and possibly not have to have such an enlargement, why did they continue to have the sky lobby? Why not make that just a room floor? So that was not clear to me. And if they can show their waivers in section, as well as on the plan, they give us the plan with color codes, and it's terrific, but cut through the sections of the areas that you're asking for waivers for and show us with the same color coding so that we understand exactly what that looks like. Ms. Romano.
I was confused a little about the difference between their existing plans and the C of O. They have 9 units, hotel rooms per floor. On the C of O, for example, on the second floor, it lists 8 hotel rooms. On the third floor, it lists 7.5. So I don't think the DOB is considering these complete hotel rooms. Some of them they're calling a lower hotel suite, and if they could explain that. And as an as-of-right scheme, if they just remove the 2 rooms on each floor abutting the inner court, wouldn't that be an as-of-right scheme? Would it be an as-of-right scheme?
No, I think the court has to be 1,200 square feet on each court.
No,
So
but I mean,
30
if
by
they
40.
didn't use those rooms as dwelling units, as rooming
Oh.
units,
Mhm.
as a different alternative as an
Taking
as-of-right
out
scheme.
all 16 rooms, you mean? Is that
Yes.
what you mean?
Well,
Oh,
actually, they're not listed as, it's all as rooms on the C of O.
Right, I see.
So I would like them to explain that. Then, as far as the stair, I was wondering if all of the stairs on the, I think it's the east side, are non-compliant in terms of width, or if it's certain sections. Because it just wasn't clear to me exactly where the problem was and why it couldn't be enlarged.
Okay. And just to add, I got a little confused when we started to talk about the court requirements for the enlargement, reading along the statement of facts. So if the statement of facts could be revised to show what the inner court requirements are for the enlargement. So first you do the calculations, then you conclude that it's actually because of the maximum required, it's a 1,200 square foot court with a minimum dimension of 30 feet. Kind of work through that in the statement of facts. I had to actually look that up myself as opposed to figure that out from the application. The other thing is the proposal really depends a lot on the light wheels of the adjoining hotel buildings, saying, well, it's actually not only, where it is 127 square feet, but it's actually much bigger because you've got the courts adjoining. But what do you do if those buildings are torn down and replaced with an office building where there are no courts? So how do you ensure that these aren't filled in the future? Is the applicant proposing to get an easement? Not sure that would actually work. That's a little tricky. If one of the buildings, I can't remember, if one of the little buildings is a landmark, that might help the argument, but I don't know the answer to that. And then the last was, the applicant in the statement of facts explains that the 1939 approvals depended on a fire tower and a fire escape, and neither of those things are needed anymore under 68 code, but it occurred to me that effectively the BSA was approving this application because there was a fire escape. And so what is being done now in this proposal to provide additional safety, because the fire escape was supposed to have been installed, I think that was part of the assumption, if not a condition to the approval. That's that.
That's it. Zoning calendar, decision items. Item number 13, 6513BZ, 123 Franklin Avenue.
Oh, this one, we're going to defer until January 6th.
Item number 14, 26613BZ, 515 East Fifth Street.
And I believe this one's being deferred as well.
Item number 15, 4214BZ, 783 Lexington Avenue, Manhattan.
I didn't have any comments on this.
Item number 16, 11514BZ, 85 Worth Street, Manhattan.
And we're going to defer decision on this until December 9th. We're still waiting for a fire department review on this also, because it's a late submission, not because of the fire department.
Continued hearing items. Item number 17, 7811BZ and 33 through 3712A, 78-70 Winchester Boulevard, Queens.
The applicant made a submission, pretty much, I think, answering a lot of our questions. I still had concerns about the fire department road, or the non-fire department road, I guess, that they're calling it now, that circumvents the site. If they could come back to us with a determination whether or not the fire department is going to require that road around the building, that would be helpful, instead of them just simply saying it's a non-fire department road. I think we had asked them to have the fire department look at that and make sure the plan was fine. They gave us plans on landscaping that back up on neighbors' rear yards. And they talked about the 82nd, I guess it's 82nd Street gate, and how that was treated.
82nd Avenue.
82nd Avenue, sorry, on how that was treated. Do we have any other comments?
I just want to make a comment, well, maybe Commissioner Montanez? do you
Oh,
have
I
comments?
just, they said that the gate at 82nd Avenue was going to have to be pushed westward, I guess. And it looked to me that that would be pushing it into the roadway for that particular facility. So, and then the way I understood it is, I guess, one entry to one facility will be gated and the other entry will be an open roadway. It wasn't really clear. If they could maybe just give us a schematic, I guess it's something they're going to have to negotiate with the adjacent owner of the property, of how they're going to have this entrance to their site. But in terms of the other questions, I thought their application was, the submission was okay.
Okay. And I just wanted to make one general sort of procedural comment. I actually don't know, I hope people are listening on the video. Because we've had 4 hearings on this, this will be the 5th hearing. We really want to confine remarks from the public to the recent submission that was made on 10/28. So we are going to restrict the testimony by the public to 1.5 minutes instead of 3, and to please restrict comments to submission-specific issues. Okay.
Item number 18, 18813BZ and 18913A, 20 Daya Court, Staten Island.
Okay, this,
Adjourn.
we're going to adjourn till January 6th.
Item number 19, 32813BZ, 8 Berry Street, Brooklyn.
The applicant came back to us with a new set of drawings, a revised set, and also specifically showing the existing PCE space and how they were exiting, that they have 2 doors. What is not clear on that drawing is where those doors actually lead to. I understand it's a temporary space, but I think we should at least know where they lead, and whether it's a direct access to the street or it's not very clear. And also, is there a fire alarm in that space? I don't think that they tell us that. But the doors should also be fireproof, self-closing, et cetera. So there should be those types of notes on the drawing that deal with the existing space. Anything else?
No.
Item number 20, 3814BZ, 116 Oxford Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, this one, we had a hearing just last week on this, and so the applicant should be aware of all the questions we had. Tomorrow's hearing, we're just going to speak about whether the owner wants to proceed with a special permit for the rear yard waiver for the flag lot portion of the building. It's a special permit under section 7369, or whether they'll just make the modifications to the drawings to show minimum of a 20-foot rear yard. Okay, those are my comments. Did you want to add anything about?
Well, since we're only discussing their rear yard, I don't know if it's appropriate to discuss anything else that's on the drawing, but.
Well, I think you should mention your other concerns so they're aware in case they proceed with the application.
Understood. I did still have questions concerning the little bump out on that the house sort of has, that it bumps out and touches the property line, and the applicant is saying that since it's pre-61, it's a pre-existing noncompliance, and they have a 1949 survey that shows that. But I am concerned that this perhaps was not a legal construction, and that's what I had asked them to prove, not just that it was there, but that it was a permitted piece of construction. It could be, and I would urge the applicant to maybe do a little more research. There were several alterations and a couple of building notices that apply to this building after the certificate of occupancy was gotten. So perhaps with a little bit of research, one can find that that is a permitted piece of construction. Otherwise, I would say that they needed to pull back the 4 foot 3 inches, which appears to be a legal noncompliance from that side lot line, and that seems to be where the original building was constructed. So I need a little more convincing on this, not just simply a survey that was taken in 1949, but show me how it was legally built in that way.
Item number 21, 4514BZ, 337 99th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay. They provided a drawing that showed that the tandem parking proposal was actually approved by the Department of Buildings, so that 2 cars in. And they provided proof, I believe, of that the existing structure at the rear was existing. They did ask for an adjournment. Yes, but I just kind of wanted to go over some issues, just so hopefully they will listen to this. One, they need to be clear that this application is a legalization, and then they should go over our other comments from the hearings that were on the video, and they need to revise the application and the statement of facts to show that it is a legalization, and provide information on how the 20-foot rear yard will impact neighbors, and provide photos of the rear, by providing photos of the rear taken from the roof of the building. That's going to be a standard requirement for all of these applications, whereas there's an extension in the rear proposed. Anybody else?
Okay, item number 22, 12214BZ, 1318 East 28th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, sorry. Okay, the applicants were asked to provide information on how the 20-foot rear yard would impact the neighbors, and they didn't do that, actually. The statement of facts must address all the issues that are relevant to the special permit, all the findings, neighborhood character. The land use study has to be tied together. The photos that were provided with land use study must be labeled to provide the data that's shown on the list, show the locations of each of these on the map. This is another one where the applicant has to make the argument, not just provide us with a bunch of stuff and then we figure it out ourselves. There was the biggest issue for me on this application is that this is a semi-attached house. And so the proposal is to significantly alter the roof line of this side of the attached house and do nothing to the other side because it's not theirs. And so I'm struggling with what this actually does to the character of the house, which makes it not in character with the neighborhood if it's too odd looking. They provided actually a really good rendering of the house that's proposed, but it's only taken from the side of the house where the addition is being made, not from the side of the house where the addition isn't being made. So you actually don't have any idea how it's impacting that other side. So I appreciate the rendering done by hand, kind of impressive, but it doesn't. We need one also taken from the other side. And I think, and then in terms of elevations, there's a chimney that's kind of this moving chimney. Sometimes it's low, sometimes it's high, sometimes it's not there. Please coordinate the chimney. Any other comments?
I had the same chimney question in the elevations. They seem to be correct, but in some of their sections, it doesn't seem to be correct. And I'm wondering, though, if they actually they share a chimney with the adjoining building, right? I'm not sure whether that's true, but it kind of looks that way. So I'm just wondering if that's the case, do they indeed then have to raise the chimney portion of the adjoining neighbor? So it's above their new ridge line. I asked that question only because I couldn't tell from the drawings whether or not they actually shared the chimney. And I didn't understand, there's sort of a gully in the roof line at the front of the building, and I'm not sure exactly what that is and why that happens. So it was not clear to me in plan, at least, why that happened. So, those are mine.
Any
Well,
others?
I mean, I think he did what I had sort of suggested the last time, which was he kept the front the same, and then it was very confusing to visualize the roof. And in doing that, I think I realized that his existing plans are not correct. He should correct them, because it doesn't show the roof line in the front the way it is. And he's sort of extending that roof up and back. It still looks a little weird because it has a peaked roof instead of just a one-sided dormer. And if he could just explain why he doesn't feel that that's an option.
Right. The dormer would probably be a very simple solution to this. You could maintain the form of the house, which, by the way, one of the reasons for me that this is a problem is because there are other houses right adjacent that are of the same exact time period. So when you kind of bubble this one out, you're doing potential real violence to the neighborhood character because of this similarity of houses all in a row. And a dormer would be a very classic way that these 1940s, 20s houses were modified. So,
Well, he has to get the additional
Yeah.
roof height,
right,
but still,
Adjust the slope.
yeah,
It might
just
look-
the slope, yeah.
different, better.
Okay, that's it.
Item number 23, 14114BZ, 2465 Broadway, Manhattan.
Okay, we were asked to adjourn this, so we'll discuss dates tomorrow.
Okay, back to new cases. Item number 2, 16614BZ, 12 West 27th Street, Manhattan. It's a PCE.
This is a PCE, and I had no issues. It's an existing mixed-use commercial building. Mixed use being commercial. Okay, thanks.
This concludes the executive session for November 24th.